I will never forget that night. The night I realized my own brother would rather leave me penniless than let me touch our father's inheritance. We sat at our mother's old table, smelling of wax and memories. Father's hands never got around to fixing its chipped surface. Just a few hours before, we had buried his body. The house was flooded with flowers, their sweet, cloying scent seemed sacrilegious against the backdrop of our grief. I felt wrung out, broken, but I was trying to hold on for Mom's sake. Ethan, my brother, opened our father's will with trembling fingers. There was a feverish fire dancing in his eyes that I had never seen before. As if he already knew what was written there. Knew what was in store for me. And how could I have been so blind? Ethan had always been Dad's favorite. Since birth. Any of his antics, dropping out of college, wrecked cars, Dad chalked it up to youth and gave him another chance. And me? I tried my best. I got excellent grades, came home on time, smoothed things over. I desperately wanted to earn at least a little of my father's love. But he was a complicated man, with his own strange principles that Ethan understood much better than I did. And he succeeded. Ethan had a sparkling personality and a gift of persuasion that Dad couldn't seem to get enough of. I guess I was too quiet for them. After the funeral, we sat in the dimly lit dining room, and the silence weighed heavily on us. My hands still smelled of lilies and funeral wreaths. Ethan cleared his throat and began to read the will. He read out how our father's property would be divided, the house, the land passed down from his grandfather, a small commercial building for rent, and all the savings and pension funds. At first, it all sounded normal. Dad was dividing everything equally between his children. But then Ethan stumbled, staring at the second sheet as if it had been attached at the last moment. It said that Ethan, as the eldest, should dispose of everything fairly and wisely. This short addendum turned everything upside down. Finishing reading, Ethan looked up, and a smug smirk slid across his face. "Well, it looks like Dad wanted me to be in charge," he said, tapping his finger on the last line of the will. There was undisguised triumph in his voice. He believed in my integrity. "And I won't let you down. I promise I'll arrange everything as it should be. Don't worry about anything." I just nodded in response, vaguely realizing what exactly I was promising. The relief at the thought that my father's last will would be fulfilled, even if not without Ethan's help, overshadowed everything else. Grief seemed to cloud my mind, preventing me from doubting his sudden confidence. That night we drove off. I returned to my cramped apartment in the city center, and he stayed in our father's house to organize the funeral arrangements. I kept telling myself that we would discuss everything soon. But weeks passed, and there was no word from Ethan. My calls were invariably forwarded to voicemail, and messages went unanswered. I was stuck in some kind of horrible limbo, not knowing whether I was even mentioned in my father's will, or whether Ethan now controlled everything on his own. One Friday, my patience snapped. After work, I snapped and drove straight to my father's house. My heart was pounding as I climbed the very steps of the porch where my father loved to sit, carving his simple figures out of wood to pass the time. The door swung open, and Ethan appeared on the threshold. He seemed to be expecting me. On his wrist was a watch that took my breath away at just one glance. It must have cost a fortune. My stomach turned cold, as if foreboding something that would forever be etched in my memory. He invited me into the living room, casually mentioning that there had been a few changes. The house smelled of fresh paint, and expensive, polished furniture had replaced our old, cozy sofa. Boxes were piled up along the walls, but my gaze was drawn to a huge canvas mounted on the wall. And there was no sign of the old father's gun that always hung in the office. Ethan gave me a condescending smile. "We've updated things a bit here," he announced. "Dad wanted me to tidy up the house, prepare it, so to speak, for the future." I forced a smile. "What about the rest of his instructions? Did you check the accounts?" He shrugged. "Oh, yeah, about that. I spoke to my lawyer friend, and it seems Dad gave me pretty much complete freedom of action. The trust, the property, the bank accounts, I have to manage all of it in the best way to honor his memory." And, he coughed awkwardly, avoiding my gaze, I hate to say this, but Dad confessed to me that you might not be responsible enough to manage the money. I guess I'll keep everything safe for now. Maybe I'll give you a little bit if you're really pressed. But the main assets are now in my name. At first, I was stunned, not believing my ears. But the smug grin on his face left no room for doubt. You're kidding, I gasped, trying to process what I'd just heard. You can't just take everything. That's not what Dad would have wanted. The will clearly states that it should be divided equally. Ethan sighed, rolling his eyes. It did, until he added that little addendum about my sole decision-making power. Basically, he handed me all the authority. Sorry if that upsets you, but let's face it. I earned Dad's trust. You, on the other hand, you were always a bit on the periphery. Dad didn't think you could handle continuing the family business. A wave of searing anger surged from deep within my chest. I clenched my fists, trying not to scream. Ethan, that's ridiculous. Dad never said anything like that to me. Where's the proof? He smugly waved some papers in front of my face. Here it is. Signature, date, everything's in order. My lawyer confirmed it, it's all perfectly legal. Dad wanted me to decide the future of the company. Which means I have the right to do what I think is best. And now, replaying his words in my head, I realized that he intended to be the sole heir. If you're nice enough, maybe I'll throw you a bone, but only if you ask nicely, echoed in my mind. I felt paralyzed. A lump formed in my throat, cutting off my breath. You think you can get away with this? Steal my share? Call me unworthy? My voice trembled with hurt and fury, ready to explode. I'm your sister, not some stranger you can just cheat like this. I blurted out, hoping to appeal to his conscience. He just shrugged, as if swatting away a pesky fly. It's not cheating if Dad gave me the go-ahead. And honestly, don't make a scene. You'll only make yourself look pathetic. Then, in a tone that made my blood boil, he added, well, if that's all, I have to go. I have a meeting with the interior designer. Stumbling slightly, I shuffled towards the door, tears stinging my eyes, my head a whirlwind of thoughts. On the porch, I paused, greedily inhaling the warm evening air. The old wind chimes tinkled softly, a painful echo of what this house used to be. The house. I stepped off the porch, got into my car, and drove away, clenching my teeth until my jaw ached. With horror, I realized that Ethan had no intention of sharing anything. Nothing. He was like an obsessed man, convinced of his twisted interpretation of Dad's last will, believing it gave him the right to the entire inheritance. Back in my modest apartment, I finally managed to collect myself and coldly assess the situation. Only one question pulsed in my mind, is it worth fighting him in court, filing a lawsuit for my share? But my savings were meager, and my salary was modest. Ethan, on the other hand, held the entire family empire in his hands, and he was cunning to boot. He could drag me through years of litigation until I exhausted all my tiny resources. It seemed like a hopeless case. The night passed in agonizing reflection. Memories of family dinners surfaced like a persistent nightmare. Dad showered Ethan with praise even for the smallest achievements, as if I didn't even exist. And then the talk would start about how Ethan needed more support, more leniency, because he was, you see, finding himself. This scenario repeated itself over and over, with no end in sight. Even from the grave, Dad's favoritism gave Ethan unlimited power. I was about to give up when a tiny spark of hope ignited within me, childhood conversations about legal intricacies, random advice Dad had shared when I'd shown interest in estate planning, trust funds, and hidden clauses in wills. Dad was certainly an eccentric personality, but not a fool. I remembered him saying, "Daughter, one day you might need to read between the lines of those official-looking papers. What's emphasized in bold print often hides the real meaning." I was 12, maybe 13, but his words had stuck in my memory. Like a seed planted in fertile ground. And I began to dig. Evenings were spent in the musty local library, poring over volumes on wills and trusts. I studied the real estate laws of our state, like an alchemist searching for the philosopher's stone. I needed some kind of hint, a key to the puzzle. Every weekend, I went to the county archives, where I meticulously examined property records registered in Dad's name. And there it was. Our house did indeed belong to him, but I also discovered 2 other plots of land that I had no idea existed. The addresses were unfamiliar, far outside our hometown. One was in a neighboring county, the other in another state. My father was a secret land collector, a miser hoarding his treasures. Further searches led me to an old business partner of Dad's who had once helped him acquire property as part of a joint venture. The intrigue pulled me deeper and deeper, like quicksand. A shiver ran down my spine as I stumbled upon the old records. Documents, codes, terms of inheritance, they could all be hidden here. Why hadn't Ethan mentioned any of this? Most likely, he simply hadn't bothered to check. He assumed that Dad's fields were all the property there was, besides the house. How wrong he was. Dad owned so much more. For hours, I pieced together the puzzle, as if collecting scattered fragments. Step by step, the complex structure Dad had created began to reveal itself. Something so intricate that even an unscrupulous lawyer like Ethan couldn't fully comprehend it. In short, part of the estate was controlled by a legal entity, some kind of trust with very peculiar conditions. To unlock it, certain requirements had to be met. And then, delving deeper into the reading, I came across a real gold nugget. In the event that the beneficiary, singular, fails to obtain unanimous family approval or attempts to disinherit an equal heir, the trust automatically passes to the specified equal heir. My heart pounded in my ears, as if trying to break free from my chest. Could this really be happening? I devoured every line of the document, afraid to believe my eyes. Dad. He had created this partial trust years ago. Probably when Ethan was going through his rebellious phase, or something like that. Perhaps Dad foresaw that Ethan might act exactly as he is now. The clause stated very clearly, if Ethan tries to push me out, I automatically become the rightful heir to this part of Dad's fortune. He wouldn't even need to amend the main will for it to take effect. It was a completely separate legal structure. It's a trap, I whispered, leaning back on the sofa and feeling a chill run through my body. Dad had left a trap for Ethan. Hidden, but deadly. He probably never imagined it would ever be triggered. Or, maybe he did foresee it? Maybe that's why his note in the will was so ambiguous, so vague, as if he knew this game wasn't over yet. Dad, while formally appointing Ethan as the chief administrator, had left me a secret lever, the ability to take everything back if Ethan turned cruel. A strange, bitter sense of pride in his cunning plan welled up inside me. Now, I couldn't just wave this clause in Ethan's face. No, I understood he would hire an army of lawyers, twist every word, and drown me in endless litigation. I needed to act strategically. If I pounced on him now, he would hide the assets, get rid of them before I could do anything, or try to challenge the trust. Therefore, I decided to keep my ace up my sleeve while I planned every step. I would find the best probate lawyer and let Ethan bask in his victory, thinking I was too poor and naive to resist. In the following weeks, his arrogance reached the heavens. He threw a housewarming party in Dad's house, invited business partners, old college friends, proudly showing off his property, sipping expensive champagne, and boasting about plans for expansion and renovation. His eyes showed undisguised triumph, and every gesture exuded superiority. He never once extended an invitation to me. I heard about it secondhand from a mutual acquaintance. A blow to the gut. And then those photos on social media. Especially the one where he was flaunting Dad's ring. The very one Dad had promised me, knowing my love for its intricate pattern. Ethan was wearing it like a conquered trophy. Swallowing the bitterness, I continued to play my role. I even called him a couple of times, feigning friendliness, praising his choices, hoping he would think I had resigned myself to the situation. In response, he just laughed mockingly into the phone, assuring me that I was wise to stay away. Every word he spoke pierced my heart like a shard of glass. But I needed him to continue basking in his complacency. and I pretended to accept defeat. A month later, my search was successful. I found a lawyer, Ms. Chandler, who specialized in complex family trusts. On the day of my visit to her office, a glimmer of hope shone for the first time in a long time. She silently studied Dad's documents, and suddenly her face lit up with a barely perceptible but encouraging smile. "So, your father foresaw this turn of events," she said, tapping her finger on the line about asset reversion. There was steel in her voice. "If your brother has indeed attempted to disinherit you or disregarded your right to an equal share, this automatically triggers the change of ownership mechanism in the trust. Theoretically, you gain full control over its entire contents." Her eyes lit up with a gleam of excitement. "But for that, we need irrefutable proof of your brother's attempt to disinherit you, written confirmation. Only then can we activate this trust clause." I nodded vigorously, feeling hope ignite within me. "I have a correspondence with him where he states directly that I won't get a penny because Dad considered me unworthy. Will that be enough?" She carefully reviewed the messages, her eyebrows lifting. "This is more than convincing. Ignoring your rights is another strong argument in our favor. I'm confident we have an ironclad case." She paused for a moment, her gaze becoming serious. "But be extremely careful, and don't warn him under any circumstances. We want the judge to see this evidence, not his lawyers. If he finds out about our plans, he might take desperate measures, such as taking out a loan secured by the assets or quickly selling off property. Let's keep everything strictly confidential until I file the petition with the court." My heart pounded in my chest like a trapped bird. I never thought I'd be one of those people who relishes the prospect of triumph, but Ethan's atrocities justified everything. This isn't just payback, it's long-awaited justice. Week after week, Ms. Chandler, like an experienced detective, gathered clues and facts, and with cold calculation, we built our irrefutable argument. I, gritting my teeth, kept silent, sharing my worries only with my closest friend, seeking some comfort in his support. My modest apartment transformed into a headquarters, littered with mountains of photocopies and legal documents. I continued to go to work, but every day felt surreal, as if I were living a double life, one ordinary and routine, and the other secret, dedicated to devising a plan that would plunge Ethan's world into the abyss. This gave me a deceptive sense of power after so many months of feeling completely helpless. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to bask in the limelight, boasting about the new profitable ventures he inherited from his father, including those ill-fated farmlands. But, ironically, he never suspected the existence of other properties. When I saw pictures of him behind the wheel of a brand-new, ostentatiously expensive car with a license plate proclaiming his success, it brought a bitter smile to my face. In one photo, he smugly wrote, "Living the best life. Dad would be proud." His words sounded like a challenge, a mockery of my pain. Nausea rose in my throat. Dad might have been willing to forgive Ethan's ostentatious nature, but I never would, especially after he cut me out of his life. Let him swagger around, unsuspecting. The moment of truth will be all the sweeter when all the cards are revealed. Finally, Ms. Chandler completed her quiet maneuvers, discreetly verified the trust assets, sent preliminary notices to the necessary counties, and made sure Ethan hadn't taken out any liens or sold anything. We were ready to file the lawsuit. According to Ms. Chandler, this quiet legal offensive would essentially freeze key assets immediately after the petition was accepted, preventing Ethan from taking out large loans or transferring property deeds. Everything was ready. All that remained was to choose the moment to strike. Ms. Chandler gave me an encouraging smile. "The power is in your hands. It's up to you to pull the trigger." I chose a date coinciding with Thanksgiving, a time of year when Ethan traditionally hosted large family gatherings to show off his achievements to distant relatives. Dad loved hosting lavish receptions, but now Ethan had taken over. The idea of tearing off his mask at the very moment when he was playing the role of a charming heir seemed devilishly appealing. Ms. Chandler nodded, sharing my personal satisfaction. From a legal point of view, everything was impeccable. All that remained was to wait for a judge to hear the case. The day before the lawsuit was filed, Aunt Charlotte let slip that Ethan was planning a grand opening of some new addition to Dad's house, either a fancy library or something like that. He sent invitations to distant relatives, neighbors, and even local businessmen, all under the guise of a luxurious dinner party. "Are you coming?" Aunt Charlotte asked. He replied, and there was a mocking tone in his voice, "You probably won't. Something about you resists holidays." I could barely contain my laughter. "Oh, I'll definitely be there," I assured her calmly. "I won't miss it this time." So, on the day Ms. Chandler filed the petition, I put on my most stunning dress. Determination seethed within me, masked by an expression of composure. I understood that Ethan wouldn't receive the court notices immediately. It would take a day or two before the full impact of what was happening dawned on him. That evening, I headed to my father's house. Crossing the threshold, I felt like the mistress of the house, because, according to the will, that could soon be true. The house was buzzing with life. Warm light, lively chatter, and the aroma of exquisite appetizers created a festive atmosphere. Unfamiliar faces surrounded Ethan, congratulating him on his newfound inheritance. I spotted him by the fireplace, casually swirling a glass of something undoubtedly expensive. Noticing me, his smirk twisted into something crooked and unpleasant. He approached without a thought of a hug. "Olivia," he said dismissively. "Surprised to see you here. Didn't think you had the nerve." I forced a polite smile. "It's Thanksgiving. Dad always wanted the family together." Several guests nearby fell silent, clearly sensing the tension in the air. Ethan took a sip from his glass. "Well, enjoy the holiday. Just remember, I'm in charge now, and I'm paying for everything." He shot me a look full of contempt, silently telling me to get lost. I wandered aimlessly through the house, memories flooding back like a raging river. There was the foyer where Dad patiently taught me to tie my shoelaces, his face lit with a kind smile. And the hallway where Ethan once locked me in during a thunderstorm, thinking it was funny, as I pounded on the door in terror, choking back tears. A storm raged within me, grief, rage, longing, all mixed into one painful knot. But I pulled myself together, focusing on the present. This was the last day Ethan would single-handedly control Dad's legacy. Around 9 o'clock, as the dinner party wound down, Ethan, wearing a smug smile, began to make a toast. He lauded himself for supposedly preserving their father's legacy. His words flowed freely, expansions, new deals, promises to safeguard the family's assets as their father would have wanted. I stood in the shadows, at the very edge of the crowd, silently recording his speech on my phone. Every word he spoke, every boastful claim about hiding assets from me, was another nail in his coffin. Perfect, I thought, just one more piece of evidence, just in case. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward and cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I was trembling inside. All eyes turned to me. "Ethan might want to inform everyone that a lien has been placed on the estate as of today, pending litigation. He tried to cheat me out of my rightful share, but Dad's trust won't allow it." A murmur of surprise and confusion rippled through the room. Ethan's face paled instantly, but he tried to maintain a facade of calm. Forcing a laugh, he spat, "You must be joking. You don't have any share. Dad made me the sole executor." His eyes flashed with anger, and his fists clenched involuntarily. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder, waving it casually in the air. "Here's a surprise for you, Ethan. The trust Dad created years ago. It clearly states, attempt to disinherit or defame me and kiss the assets goodbye. You had no idea this existed, did you?" I paused, savoring the moment. "We filed a petition with the court this morning. You'll be officially notified tomorrow. The gist is that the estate, the accounts, everything, could revert to me if the judge sees how you tried to cut me out. And guess what? You admitted it yourself in your messages. You lied, claiming Dad thought I was unworthy. It's over, Ethan. You lost." Silence crashed over the living room. Ethan's jaw dropped. I could see his eyes darting around, searching for any sign of support, but none of our cousins or neighbors rushed to his defense. Everyone was simply stunned. Aunt Charlotte, her hands trembling, set her wine glass down on the table. The air hung thick with tension, as if everyone was holding their breath. Ethan exploded. "That's ridiculous. Dad would never do that. He told me I was the rightful heir. This is just a pathetic stunt, your attempt to play lawyer or whatever you think you are." His face was flushed with rage, his fists clenched. He lunged for the folder, but I deftly pulled it away. "Talk to your lawyer, Ethan," I said evenly, my voice like ice. "He'll confirm the validity of the trust. And the county records too. If you have nothing to hide, why are you so upset? Or does this explain all those threatening texts, that I wouldn't see a cent of the inheritance? Or all those times you said I wasn't entitled to anything?" I glared at him, my eyes full of contempt. "You outsmarted yourself, Ethan." A murmur rippled through the room as guests recoiled from him, as if afraid of being tainted by his filth. I turned to leave, but glanced back one last time. Ethan stood there, crimson with rage, his knuckles white, words caught in his throat. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. In the following weeks, the legal machine kicked into high gear. Ethan's lawyer tried to fight it, but the trust documents were flawless. Dad had done everything right, with seals and signatures. And we had something else, his own admissions. He himself provided evidence that he was intentionally trying to deprive me of my share. And that's when the intentional concealment clause kicked in. The judge scheduled a hearing, and Miss Chandler, exuding composure and confidence, took her place. Ethan, like a seasoned magician, tried to pull a dirty trick out of his sleeve, accusing me of forging documents. He foamed at the mouth, arguing for his inalienable right to sell part of our father's farmland, supposedly to cover maintenance costs. The judge, not letting him get away with it, nipped this brazen attempt in the bud, flatly prohibiting any manipulation of the property until the proceedings were over. The irony, like a cruel mockery, was that our father had substantial bank accounts that we didn't even suspect existed. But fortunately, these funds were protected by a trust agreement. Ethan had to provide statements, and the truth came out. Large sums were going to his personal whims, expensive watches, a fancy car, lavish dinners. This was a crushing blow to his reputation in the eyes of the judge, who, not hiding his indignation, asked a direct question: "Why didn't you offer your sister even the slightest share, when the will clearly stipulates a fair distribution?" Ethan, as if caught red-handed, began to mumble excuses. But the final blow was the statement presented by Miss Chandler, a recording where Ethan, without mincing words, stated that I was grabbing every cent because I had the right to. He spewed curses, claiming that I was unworthy, that my father had always not cared about me. At that moment, I felt something break inside me. He threw those words to his buddy, not knowing that we accidentally overheard their phone conversation. And this buddy, hearing Ethan's boastful chatter, immediately leaked everything to me. It was the trigger, that phrase that the trust needed to set everything right. The judge, after reading the transcript, simply shook his head and declared that Ethan had violated the terms of the trust, giving me full control. All of Ethan's pathetic attempts to object were ignored. The day the judge made that decision seemed like a surreal dream. I sat in the courtroom, as if paralyzed, while Miss Chandler gently squeezed my hand. "Congratulations," she whispered, "it's over. The trust is yours. Ethan will have to vacate the property and transfer all assets. He can appeal, but it's useless." My head swam with a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. Part of me never wanted it to come to this. Our father's legacy was supposed to be a common good, but Ethan's selfishness left me no choice. Now he will lose everything he had just begun to enjoy. Leaving the courthouse, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and I could finally breathe freely. Outside, leaning against a column, stood Ethan. Eyes red with rage and humiliation, arms crossed. His gaze was filled with a storm of emotions. His gaze was full of venom, as if he wanted to incinerate me on the spot. You cheated me," He hissed through his teeth, each word dripping with malice. You set all this up. I sighed wearily, putting all the bitterness of the last few weeks into that sound. No, Ethan, you cheated yourself. If you had simply acted fairly, divided everything equally, as our father wanted, we would both have had a comfortable life. But you wanted more, you needed to get rid of me. Father set a test for you, and you failed miserably. His eyes flashed with hatred. He seemed ready to pounce on me. You'll regret this, he muttered, turned, and walked heavily out of the room. Each of his steps echoed loudly in my soul. In the following weeks, Ethan's life collapsed like a house of cards. He was forced to leave our father's house, give up all accounts and property under the management of the trust. Information surfaced about a piece of farmland in a neighboring state, which turned out to be a real gold mine, but, alas, inaccessible to him. The luxurious lifestyle he flaunted so much disappeared in an instant, as if it never existed. The fashionable watch, the object of his pride, went under the hammer. The sports car, a symbol of his success, was sold for debts. He tried to pay at least part of his exorbitant legal bills with the remnants of funds, but this was barely enough for crumbs. As a result, Ethan was left without a job, without a home, living from couch to couch at a friend's place downtown. The rumor that Ethan's inheritance had evaporated due to his own arrogance and cruelty spread among our relatives faster than lightning. In each retelling, there was a note of gloating and edification. About a month after I officially became the mistress of the estate, Ethan appeared on the territory without warning. I was just rummaging in my father's old office, desperately trying to understand if there was anything else hidden there that I should know about. A soft knock on the door made me jump. Opening it, I saw him. Ethan looked broken. The difference was shocking. He was gaunt, unshaven, and his clothes were rumpled and reeked of stale sweat. His eyes were red and puffy, as if he hadn't slept in days. Olivia, he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. We need to talk. I hesitated, but then stepped out of the office, closing the door firmly behind me. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep my voice as cold as possible. He swallowed, nervously twisting his fingers. I messed up. I see that now. I never thought you'd actually fight back. I'm so used to Dad forgiving me everything. I thought you'd be the same. Well, you were wrong, I snapped, my voice devoid of sympathy. He nodded, tears welling in the corners of his eyes. I know. And I'm so sorry. I was greedy and insecure. You were always stronger than me, more driven. Maybe I felt overshadowed, and it made me do terrible things. Is there any chance you could help me? I mean. His words echoed in my mind, turning everything inside out. Images of childhood flashed through my head when we were inseparable. I remembered how Dad clearly favored me, and how that injustice might have scarred Ethan. But then other memories surfaced, his taunts, his boasting that he would get everything while I would be left with nothing. The nights in the hospital after Dad's death, when I felt utterly alone. The pain pierced me, but through it, a faint sense of pity emerged. He's still my brother. What exactly do you want me to do? I asked quietly, trying to hide the turmoil of emotions. He lowered his head, avoiding my gaze. Maybe you could put me up in one of the cottages on the estate? Or give me a small loan to get back on my feet. I can't keep drifting around forever. You have everything now. Dad's inheritance, the farmland, the accounts, and I have nothing. I was silent. This was the moment I had dreamed of, the moment he would crawl back, humiliated and begging. But instead of the expected sweetness, I felt only a new, unfamiliar coldness in my heart. My heart turned to stone. I realized that I couldn't let him completely fall apart. But I couldn't trust him with a single cent of my savings either. I'm willing to offer you the old caretaker's cottage by the garden for a month, rent-free. But that's it, Ethan. You need to find a job, figure out transportation. If you can get back on your feet, then we'll talk. But there will be no handouts. He blinked rapidly, and tears streamed down his cheeks. That's that's more than I deserve." "Thank you," he whispered, reaching out as if to hug me. I stepped back. I may have shown a little mercy, but we were still far from that kind of closeness. So Ethan ended up in the tiny caretaker's cottage on the edge of the garden, the very garden he had once proudly planned to turn into a private golf course. Now it was his cramped, humble abode. Meanwhile, I meticulously managed Dad's estate for months, learned to responsibly lease the farmland, and even took on some of his former charitable duties. My heart thawed, not because I was gloating over my brother, but because justice had prevailed, despite all his transgressions. How ironic that Dad, our father, had woven this ingenious plan to rescue me from trouble. At night, I'm still visited by a quiet sadness. Dad is no longer with us, and the naive dream that Ethan and I would manage the estate together has vanished like smoke. But through that sadness, a seed of pride sprouts, pride in having stood up for myself. And also, a quiet, almost rebellious satisfaction as I imagine Ethan spending his days in that miserable cottage, surely pondering how differently his fate could have turned out if he had been just a little smarter. From time to time, he timidly knocks on my door, asking for small favors, a ride to the bus station, help filling out a job application. I don't slam the door in his face, no, but I keep my distance. He tries to appear humble. Sometimes I see in his eyes the pure relief that washed over me then, the realization that Ethan's cruelty would not go unpunished. These memories fill me with a bittersweet, yet peaceful feeling. Dad's last gift wasn't just a piece of land or a coin. It was a chance to protect myself from a brother who always took more than he gave. So, here's my story. The story of how Ethan declared me unworthy of even a drop of Dad's inheritance, how he boasted that everything now belonged to him. And I silently allowed him to believe in his victory. And then I used the trust created by Dad to reclaim everything, down to the last asset. In the end, Ethan lost everything, the fancy house, the land, the accounts, and all the luxurious things he enjoyed for just a few short months. Right now, he only has a humble home over his head, and that's just because I allow it. And in his eyes, I see that volatile mix of envy and regret that he'll never be able to shake. It's not a perfect ending, but it's an ending I can live with, knowing that justice has been served. And that I was able to stand up for myself in a way that my father might finally be proud of.